My name is Emily Carter. I was 37 years old when my marriage ended, not with shouting or slammed doors, but with a silence so complete it felt intentional. From the outside, my life looked stable. I lived just outside Boulder, Colorado, in a quiet neighborhood where evenings were predictable and people waved politely. I had a steady job in operations support for a medical logistics company, a clean apartment, a marriage that had lasted 9 years. People called that success. What they didn't see was how thin everything had become. The night it finally broke was supposed to matter. It was June 18th, our wedding anniversary. It was also my husband Daniel Carter's birthday. 9 years together, and I still believe shared dates carried weight. I left work early that afternoon and drove across town to buy Daniel's favorite red wine. I stopped at a specialty market for short ribs, even though I'd never cooked them confidently. I wanted the effort to speak for me. I set the table carefully. White cloth, candles, soft lights along the balcony rail. Inside the refrigerator waited a small custom cake with simple words written across the top. Happy birthday. Happy anniversary. Nothing dramatic. Just honest. By 7 p.m., everything was ready. I changed into a dress Daniel once said he liked and checked my phone. Nothing. At 8 o'clock, I lit the candles. At 9 o'clock, I sent a short message. I'm waiting. At 9:30, I called. It rang until voicemail. At 10:42 p.m., an email arrived. One sentence. Big client emergency. Staying late. We'll celebrate later. No apology. No mention of the date. No birthday. No anniversary. The candles burned low. Wax pooled onto the tablecloth. The food sat untouched. I stood there holding a napkin I had folded hours earlier. I didn't cry, but something in my chest shifted quietly, like a door closing without sound. That night, I packed everything away by myself. I turned off the lights. I went to bed in the same dress and stared at the ceiling. And for the first time, I let the truth surface fully. This wasn't a late night. This wasn't stress. This was the beginning of the end. Daniel was the kind of man people admired. Well-dressed, confident, a regional sales manager who spoke with certainty. At events, people smiled at him and told me I was lucky. What they didn't see was how quiet our marriage had become. He rarely came home before 10. When he did, he glanced at his phone and said he'd already eaten. Conversations turned into updates, deadlines, numbers. I worked full-time too. I paid my share. I adjusted my life around his. Somewhere along the way, my needs were quietly removed. Our marriage didn't collapse in one night. It eroded, slowly, persistently. That anniversary dinner wasn't the first time I waited for Daniel. It was just the first time I stopped lying to myself about what the waiting meant. The next morning, I went to work like nothing had happened. I showered. I dressed. I drank my coffee standing at the counter, staring at a wall I had memorized over the years. I told myself Daniel was overwhelmed, that we would talk when things settled down. That patience was still the right response. That was a habit I had trained myself into. By noon, I still hadn't heard from him. No call. No message. I checked my phone more often than I admitted to myself. There was a tightness in my chest now, not panic, just a quiet unease I couldn't name. During my lunch break, I stepped into an empty hallway and did something I had never done before. I called his office. Daniel hated personal calls at work, said they made him look unprofessional. The phone rang twice before a receptionist answered. I asked for him by name. There was a pause, brief but heavy. Oh, she said slowly. Daniel doesn't work here anymore. He resigned 3 days ago. I didn't understand at first. I asked her to repeat it. She did. 3 days. That meant he had already quit before our anniversary. Before the dinner. Before the email about a client emergency. The pieces rearranged themselves instantly. The late nights. The vague answers. The way he avoided eye contact recently. The way everything felt rehearsed. There was no emergency. Daniel was leaving, and I was the last person he planned to tell. I thanked the receptionist without knowing why and ended the call. My hands were shaking now. Whatever was waiting for me at home wasn't a conversation. It was an ending. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every red light stretched. Every turn felt heavier. I wasn't driving back to my marriage. I was driving straight toward the moment everything I believed about my life would be stripped away. I unlocked the apartment door just after 6. The silence inside felt wrong. My eyes went immediately to the shoe rack by the entrance. The second row was empty. Daniel's brown leather shoes were gone. I called his name once. No answer. I walked toward the bedroom slowly, as if my body already knew what I would find. The door was half open. Daniel stood near the bed with an open suitcase on the floor. Clothes were spread around him, a navy suit, pressed shirts, a tie I had never seen before. On the dresser sat a pair of new dress shoes with the tag still attached. He looked up briefly. "You're home," he said calmly, then went back to folding. "What are you doing?" I asked. My voice sounded distant, even to me. "I accepted a new position out of state," he replied. "Albuquerque. I start next week." I stood frozen. "You quit your job," I said. "You planned all of this without telling me." Daniel zipped the suitcase halfway and reached for a thin folder. He placed it on the bed between us and slid the first page forward. Divorce papers. I stared at them, waiting for the moment to feel unreal. It didn't. "You're not the wife I need anymore," he said evenly. "You put work first. The house isn't maintained the way it should be. You cook when it's convenient. You stop trying." Something broke loose in my chest. "I work full-time," I said. "I clean. I plan. I wait for you." He waved his hand dismissively. A real wife doesn't need reminders. He lifted the suitcase and walked past me toward the door. No apology. No hesitation. The door clicked shut behind him. And in that moment, I understood something with complete clarity. My marriage hadn't ended that night. It had ended long before I was allowed to know. I stayed on the bedroom floor long after the door closed. The apartment felt unfamiliar, like a place I was only borrowing. The divorce papers rested in my hands, but I didn't open them again. I already knew what they said. Names. Dates. Clean language meant to erase 9 years with careful margins. Daniel didn't call that night. He didn't call the next morning either. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was at work. It was the building management office. The woman on the line spoke politely, as if this were a routine request. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "we received notice to terminate the lease. The primary leaseholder informed us he no longer lives in the unit. The remaining occupant is expected to vacate by the end of the month." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I asked her to repeat it. She did, then added one more detail. "He left a note stating you would be moving out before the contract ends." No discussion. No warning. No message to me. That evening, I went home and opened every drawer, every cabinet. I found receipts for the sofa, the dining table, the refrigerator. Nearly everything was under my name. Daniel had taken only his clothes and personal devices. He left the life we built as if it had been temporary. I walked through the apartment slowly. The balcony where I'd strung lights for dinners he never came home for. The kitchen where meals waited untouched. The bedroom that still smelled faintly like his cologne. And then something shifted, not with pain this time, but with clarity. Daniel didn't leave because he was unhappy. He left because it was easier to walk away than to face who he had become. That night, I placed the divorce papers on the dining table and didn't hide them. They stayed there in plain sight, not as a threat, not as a wound, as the truth. I slept without waiting for anyone to come home. The papers stayed on the table for 3 days. I passed them every morning and every night. I didn't rush to sign them, not because I hoped Daniel would return, but because I needed to understand something first. I needed to understand how I had disappeared from my own marriage without noticing the exact moment it happened. I replayed the past slowly, the compromises that started small, the disappointments I stopped voicing because they felt inconvenient, the way I learned to be grateful for the bare minimum. There was no dramatic betrayal scene, no screaming arguments, just a steady pattern of neglect I kept excusing because admitting I was lonely felt worse. Signing those papers meant accepting a hard truth. I hadn't been abandoned overnight. I had been fading out for years. On the third evening, I made myself dinner and sat alone at the table. I read every line of the documents carefully. I didn't cry. I let the finality settle. When I finished, I closed the folder and placed it back down. "Not yet," I said out loud. Not because I was unsure, but because choosing myself deserved to be deliberate. That pause wasn't weakness. It was the last courtesy I gave to a life I was about to leave behind. On Saturday night, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. Not to impress anyone, just to make sure I still recognized myself. I chose a simple black dress and pulled my hair back clean. Uncomplicated. I was attending my 18-year high school reunion at a small brewery in downtown Boulder. I had bought the ticket months earlier, back when I assumed Daniel would be standing beside me. I almost didn't go. Then I realized staying home would only confirm how much of my world had already shrunk. The room was loud and crowded, filled with familiar faces softened by time. I stayed near the back until someone said my name. "Emily!" It was Ryan Keller. He used to sit 2 rows behind me in history class. His smile was easy and forced. He offered me a drink and didn't ask anything personal right away. We talked the way people do when they don't need to perform. He told me he'd been divorced for 3 years and was raising his son on his own. There was no bitterness in his voice, just honesty. When he asked about Daniel, I answered simply, "We're getting divorced." No details, no apologies. Ryan nodded and changed the subject without pressing. Something loosened in my chest. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't being analyzed or pitted. I was just a person having a normal conversation. Later that night, driving home with the windows down, I turned on the radio. An old song played, one I used to hum quietly while cleaning the apartment alone. The words landed differently now, clear and unavoidable. My life wasn't over. It had simply stopped revolving around someone who was never really there. A week after my attorney submitted the divorce filing, my phone vibrated close to 10 at night. An email from Daniel. The subject line contained one word: proof. I opened it without hesitation. A photograph filled the screen, a marriage certificate. Daniel's name printed clearly. Beneath it, another name: Natalie Whitman, stamped and dated in New Mexico. The date was 1 day after the court finalized our divorce. Before I could fully process it, my phone rang. Daniel didn't wait for a greeting. "You saw it," he said. "I got married. Life is finally moving forward." I stayed silent. "Her family owns a major real estate firm in Santa Fe," he continued. "They helped me secure an executive role. We already have a house. Everything's handled. So that's why you needed the divorce so quickly," I said evenly. "Not entirely," he replied. "I just couldn't stay with someone who put work before her role as a wife." I almost laughed, but stopped myself. "Natalie doesn't work," he added proudly. "She chose to focus on the home." There was a pause. "And she's pregnant. 3 months." Each sentence sounded rehearsed, like a presentation delivered too smoothly to be sincere. When he finished, I wished him well and ended the call. Then I repeated her name out loud, Natalie Whitman, and something uncomfortable stirred in my memory. I opened social media and searched her name. Her profile appeared instantly. Perfect lighting, controlled angles, a carefully curated life, photos of elegant dinners, expensive interiors, soft smiles that never strained. The kind of page designed to suggest ease. Then I scrolled further back and stopped. I recognized her. Natalie Whitman hadn't always been Natalie Whitman. She used to be Natalie Mills. We had gone to the same high school. The realization didn't hit like shock. It arrived slowly, like a memory being adjusted into focus. The woman in the photos looked nothing like the girl I remembered, except for one thing: her eyes. That night, I called my friend Hannah, someone who remembered high school clearly enough to confirm what my instincts already knew. "Do you remember Natalie Mills?" I asked. There was a brief pause, then a soft laugh. "Of course. Why?" I told her everything. The divorce, the remarriage, The name change. Hannah exhaled slowly. She reinvented herself years ago. New York. Art school. New circles. Multiple surgeries. Nose. Jaw. Chin. People stopped calling her Natalie Mills a long time ago. The unease settled into understanding. I remembered Natalie from school. Quiet. Awkward. The kind of girl who avoided cameras and mirrors. The kind who learned early that attention could be cruel. Now she stood beside Daniel in a white dress, smiling like someone who had finally escaped her past. What struck me wasn't the surgery or the money. It was the similarity between them. Daniel had erased his past too. He never shared old photos, never talked about college friends, insisted on a small wedding with no one from before. At the time, I called it privacy. Now I saw it for what it was. Shame. Two people who rewrote themselves had found each other. They built a life designed to look flawless from the outside. New names, new roles, new power, but nothing built on erasure stays solid for long. I sat alone that evening thinking about how exhausting it must be to maintain an image every single day. To wake up afraid that the wrong detail might surface, that the past might speak when you're not ready to answer. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel envy. I felt relief. While they were busy hiding who they used to be, I was finally learning how to stand comfortably in who I was. 2 weeks later, an unfamiliar number appeared on my phone. I didn't answer at first. It rang again, and again. Something told me to pick up. It was Daniel. Natalie gave birth, he said immediately. A baby girl. I waited. She doesn't look like either of us, he continued. His voice was tight now, stripped of the confidence I remembered. I thought it was swelling, lighting, but I ran a DNA test. She's mine. That's not the issue. Then what is? I asked calmly. She won't hold the baby, he said. Every time she looks at her face, she turns away. Yesterday, her mother had to take the baby from the nurse because Natalie refused. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. I felt no satisfaction, no sense of justice, only a quiet heaviness for a child born into someone else's disappointment. Do you remember your high school graduation album? I asked. There was silence. I found it while cleaning the apartment, I continued. You asked me not to touch that drawer, but I did. I saw the photos, Daniel. Curly hair, crooked teeth, acne. You weren't ugly. You were human. I changed because I was insecure, he said softly. No, I replied. You changed because you wanted to escape who you were. Just like Natalie. He exhaled shakily. You think she'll look like that version of us. I think she'll look like the truth, I said. And the truth always shows up eventually. Another pause. I don't know what to do, he whispered. This time my voice softened. Love her anyway. Don't punish her for carrying what you tried to erase. He started to speak again, but I stopped him. You once told me I failed as a wife because I didn't sacrifice enough, I said. But right now, the only person refusing their role is you. I ended the call and blocked the number. Not out of anger. Out of finality. That night, I understood something clearly. I had walked away before the damage reached me, but that child would grow up inside it. And for the first time, I felt grateful that my life no longer belonged to people who couldn't face themselves. Nearly a year passed without me saying Daniel's name out loud. Not because I was trying to forget him, but because my life no longer needed a reference point from the past. I moved into a small apartment in Boulder, 10 minutes from my office. It had a narrow balcony and enough sunlight to grow herbs in mismatched pots. My mornings became quiet in a good way. I woke early, made coffee, and sat by the window without rushing anywhere. I reduced my work hours. I stopped measuring my worth by exhaustion. On weekends, I signed up for an art class, something I had postponed for years because it never fit into anyone else's schedule. I reconnected with friends, some old, some new. Ryan and I spent time together without labels or expectations. We walked, talked, and shared silence comfortably. Nothing had to be proven. One afternoon, I ran into Hannah at a used bookstore. She mentioned Daniel casually without drama. His second marriage was already unraveling. Another affair. Another explanation no one believed. I listened without reaction. There was no satisfaction in it, only distance. That evening, I stopped by a bakery on my way home and bought a single croissant. I ate it slowly on a park bench, watching the light move through the trees. My life was simple now, and for the first time, simplicity felt like freedom. People sometimes ask if I forgave Daniel. I usually smile and tell them I didn't need to. Forgiveness implies a debt. What I chose was release. I didn't rebuild my life to prove anything. I rebuilt it because staying would have meant erasing myself piece by piece. Walking away wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. Some people chase reinvention through status, beauty, or control. Others find it through honesty. One path demands constant maintenance. The other asks only that you stop pretending. Daniel and Natalie tried to outrun their past. But the truth has a way of showing up quietly, through time, through children, through consequences no one can edit away. I chose something else. I chose clarity. I chose peace. I chose a life that doesn't require explanation. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to think about where you might be shrinking to keep someone else comfortable. Like this video if you've ever been underestimated. Share it with someone who needs permission to walk away. And comment below, not with anger, but with honesty. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about freedom.